Welcome to the Untold Science Women in STEM podcast series. This series is an initiative to foster gender inclusivity in science, regionally and worldwide. It's to bring inspiring talks and conversations with pioneering women who have significantly contributed to the world of science. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce our guest, Dr. Kirsten Sadler Edepli, who has made contributions to understanding liver development, regeneration, and epigenetics. Kirsten is a professor of biology and Vice Provost for Faculty Advancement and Engagement at NYUAD, and she is known for her efforts in supporting diversity and equity in academia overall and gender equity in STEM particularly. Welcome, Kirsten, and thank you for joining us on the Untold Science Women in STEM.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
I would like to start this conversation with your personal perspective. Many women in science have inspiring personal stories. What motivated you to pursue a career in science, and what keeps you passionate about your work?
That's a great question. And I think it's really important for girls and young women entering science to see themselves in the process. And while all girls entering STEM might not reflect or connect with my story, I'm happy to share it. So I grew up as the daughter of a professor, and so was very familiar with academic life. But I didn't know, what my path was going to be until I went to a high school. I went to an all-girls high school. I think that was an important component of my education. And I had a teacher there who gave me an opportunity to do an experiment. And as we as scientists know, that the life as a scientist is very different than life as a science student. And it really opened my eyes to what it meant to be a scientist, which was having an idea and testing it out using your own hands, and then getting a result and trying to assess whether or not that result aligned with what your idea or hypothesis was. And for me, that was just so exciting. I loved spending time in the lab. And so after high school, I went on to university. I went to an all-women's college in America. I was born and raised in America. And during that time, it was very similar that I had this opportunity to work in a lab. I went and did an internship at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, associated with University of Pennsylvania. And I knew nothing about research or working in the lab. And I just felt so lucky to be able to do it. And it was very, very exciting for me to actually use my hands to do science, as opposed to reading a book and memorizing facts, which is how we often learn science. So that, I think, really, really inspired me to go into a career in research. And I went to a college where we had an opportunity to do an undergraduate thesis. And so, which is very similar to at NYUAD, with the students do a capstone project. And that I just found to be so exhilarating. I spent hours and hours in the lab. I was studying the skin and gastrointestinal tract of frogs, and an antimicrobial peptide, and that is produced in those tissues. And the person who discovered it was taking it to clinic to use as a treatment for infectious disease. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can study a frog. And that frog, what we learn about frogs is interesting to learn about frogs, but then also it can somehow, by the luck and creativity, end up in a medicine that helps people with infectious skin disease. So that to me just was mind-blowing and so exciting. And I had really great role models and mentors who there were no stupid questions. I worked very hard. I was in the lab all the time, and I was encouraged to do that. That was the positive reinforcement. I just loved it. So when I went on from there, I went to get a, actually, I was advised to be, if you like science, you should be a doctor. That's the advice.
Yeah.
And that's the advice I got. And so I said, okay, I guess that's what I should do. And I applied to medical school. not wanting to go to medical school, and I applied to one PhD program, which was my dream program, and I didn't tell anybody that I was applying there, and it was the only program I got into, and that's where I ended up doing my PhD.
So that experience in the lab, your first time, made you connect to science and discover the passionate for resolving mysteries and knowing more. And I think at NYUAD, we try to offer such opportunities for school students to feel, to test and feel this feeling and encourage them to go in that direction as well, to at least experiment and see if this is what they are looking for. Talking about mentoring, I mean, how do you see your role in mentoring and supporting the next generation of women? And why it's important, in your opinion?
Yes. So mentoring is something that I feel like is my life's work. When we think about, I'll just take a little bit of a sidetrack and talk about being a professor. So many people, I tell them I'm a professor and they say, "What do you teach?" And I say, okay, teaching in a classroom is part of my job. Sure. For me, that's a small part of my job. It's important and I do it and I really try to do a good job at it. But I feel that the mentorship component of teaching is equally, if not more important than what we do in the classroom. And of course, you can mentor when you're in the classroom. But for me, I really take that mentorship role very seriously because one, I benefited from it. I had mentors along the way that encouraged me and showed me the path, of what science was like. And two, I think I see a lot of girls and women come into university, come into academia with a lack of confidence. And in the classroom, that confidence can be further eroded because in science, often it's based on, having a skill, not an opinion. And so having that skill, if you don't have that skill from the past, I mean, I look at university, I think you should come in skill free. And then we give you the skills you need to succeed. But many people come in having taken calculus or advanced physics or something. And I look at the mentorship as a way to say, hey, I didn't know any physics when I came in, and it was really hard for me. And so I did okay, not great, but that was fine. I was able to really excel in the areas that, I was passionate about, which was biology. So I think the mentorship, helps that confidence level. The other thing I think is so important about mentorship is that we know we learn more from our failures than from our successes. And in the lab, most of what you do is doesn't work, right? Especially if you're doing molecular biology.
True.
So having a student to say to a student, say, "Oh, it didn't work. Okay, that's normal. What are you going to do next?" As opposed to, when you think of failure as a student, you think of an F on your transcript, right? But that failure as a scientist is just a normal part of your day. So I think that the mentorship comes in and says, "Oh, good, you failed, so you're going to figure something else out. What are you going to do?" And not letting that trip up students that they failed. Really, it just was the experiment didn't work. So I think the mentorship is critical there. And then finally, I'm a scientist, I'm a professor, I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a sister, and I bring all of that. My kids come into the lab, my kids, I always tell anybody if my phone rings and it's my children's school, I'll answer it no matter where I am because, there could always be an emergency. And so I bring that part of my life into who I am as a mentor and as a scientist. And I think that my students and the people I mentor see those other parts of me. And as a woman, I think it's important to see having a family. Not everybody wants a family, and that's fine, but seeing what it's like to have a family, have your priorities with your family, but also have your priorities with being an excellent scientist. And then I also want to just say something about mentorship and women and girls in science is that I think that there's this one aspect of curiosity that we all have. We all have curiosity about the world. You see it if you ever spend time with children and they ask why, right? And I think that young women, girls, even, not young women, just women in general, there is, again, comes with confidence or perception that we need to be really excellent and have the answers and really overachievers in order to be seen as good. And being curious and asking, I don't understand why, doesn't necessarily always fit with the societal role of women. So I really, really push the curiosity aspect. You saw something. What did that make you think? Where did you ask why? Or, how does that work? And so that's part of the mentorship that I always focus on is curiosity and science. Because without that, it's really sort of more
Yeah.
like a manual labor job as opposed to one that's interesting and innovative.
Yeah. I believe one of your initiative during your work here and in collaboration with the Center for Genomics is the Women in STEM lunch that we have during the conference. And one of the questions were raised often there is like having a family contradict with pursuing a career in science because it's demanding. So what I like about your mentorship style that your priority list is clear for everyone, like my kids, this is what I'm doing on my at the personal level because you are leading by example. Let's say young female scientists, they usually would like to show like I can. This is what I want to do. It's all about my work. And they fear to show that they are still mothers and they have responsibilities. So they stress themselves more. So by having you telling them, oh, okay, this is my priority. I have my kids. I respect my time. They will feel safe to say their priority as well, expecting others will respect their wishes or priorities. So mentorship in general, whether it's academic or for young women scientists, it's really critical. And we appreciate all what you are doing for them, Kirsten. Let's talk a little bit about the current women status in science. And we know that women make up though they are making almost half the global population, women still make up less than 1/3 of the world's researchers. What is your perspective or what is your idea about the current status for women in science today?
Yes, those numbers are so stubborn. Really, I've been in this field for a couple decades now, and it really hasn't budged worldwide. In some industries, it has improved, but the state of women in science right now, the number that you just shared, the 30% or less, some might count it at 27% and round down or round up to 30, but between a quarter and a third of the global workforce in STEM are female. And I think that is very frustrating to me as a scientist, as a lab head, because I know that talent is equally distributed around the world and across all genders. And if we're excluding some ideas from one sector of our population, we will miss out on the next big breakthrough or the next big step in our field because we're not getting all of the best ideas coming to the table. So as a scientist, as a lab head, I really look for diversity of thought because I also know from the market research that if you have people with different perspectives coming to a big unanswered problem, then you will come up with more ideas, and more ideas are better than fewer ideas. It doesn't mean that all ideas are good ideas. There are lots of ideas that are not feasible or not good ideas. But if you don't have them to choose from, that whole range of ideas, you'll end up with just whatever is put forward. And if everybody has the same perspective, you'll have one small set of ideas. So I really look for people that think differently from me, from my team. And if there are women or girls that are excluded from pursuing a career in science, that means that I don't get those ideas that would have come towards me or towards the problem. But I think there are so many barriers. I do think we focus a lot on the motherhood barrier to many careers because of the responsibilities but there are barriers to women that don't have children. There are barriers to women past their childbearing age. There are barriers to women that are not married. And so I think while the motherhood barrier is really important to think about and to try to implement changes for, we also need to think about the biases against women that prevent them from being recognized for their contribution. I do see that there are a lot of very effective ways that that has been changing. So, for example, in my lifetime, I've seen a near universal ban on the manels. Where you have a conference, and you and I have talked about that about the CGSB conference, that you don't have a whole session. Let's say you have a session on population genetics, and everybody speaking in that is a man, or everybody speaking that is European, or everybody speaking that has some identity. The student in the audience will say, "Oh, this is what population geneticists look like. If I want to know, think about genetics, this is who I'm going to turn to." There are no women in that lineup. Then it's the it's a continual cycle that they that it would always be a man who would be seen as the expert. So I think that some policies do make a difference, saying, for example, no manels, or we're going to have gender parity in all of our public facing scientific outreach, or speakers, or board members, or people in positions of authority or leadership will have men and women. I don't think it should be all women. That is for sure. I think it should represent the talent pool, and I think the talent pool should represent the world population. We're far
Are
from
you,
that.
yeah, hopefully one day we will reach there. Are you a part of or aware of any initiatives that try to involve a diverse team or try to empower women or anything from that kind?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So many. I can give you an example of something that I'm involved with right now. So there's a conference at the world's largest stem cell conference. The International Society for Stem Cell Research holds thousands and thousands of people come to that conference every year. I'm on the organizing committee for 2025. So we're doing that work. We've already done that work so far. And the organizers, the main organizers, the president of the society, when people put forward, they have me suggesting, and then I was paired with somebody else who is a male he's at Stanford. So we suggest very different pools of people to be speakers, right? And when we came up with a list of people to be speakers, they said, oh, it looks like there's just a lot of Europeans on here, or a lot of people from Stanford on here. Let's see if we can go back. Let's pull other people who have other perspectives. And then we reached out to other people that were, other parts of the organizing committee, and they had other suggestions. And then when it comes together, the speaker lineup is excellent. I mean, the best science in the world in stem cell biology, no question, but very diverse across career stages, across background, across gender, across the ethnicity, all of that. So I think that these steps where they say, you know what, all those speakers that you suggested are excellent. We'd love to hear their science. Hope they come to the meeting. We need to make a different choice. And it's not bad that you suggested them. We just make it. So I think that these kinds of efforts, that's just one example in the International Stem Cell Society, is one example. Another example is on hiring. So we say as the university, in order to be excellent, we need to have scientists that can see science from different perspectives. And gender is one of those lenses through which we see science. So if we have only male or only female faculty in a discipline or an area, we will not be excellent. Being diverse is synonymous with being excellent, or you cannot be excellent if you do not have multiple perspectives.
Talking about hiring, let's say, I have a question. Why do you think there is still a significant underrepresentation of women in senior scientific roles?
Oh, I love this question. So, it's really interesting. I am now, a woman in a senior role in the university, and I have many of my peers are now middle-aged like me because we train together. And many of them say, I don't want it. So there's an opting out instead of, and I think that that's very interesting. And then we look at women not in just science, but in other areas, politics, for example, women who are successful, they've had to adopt the male style of leading. And many women say, not me, not for me. I don't want to be like that. So I'm opting out instead of, I think that there is, of course, a bias because the concept of a woman as a leader, she needs to be strong, she needs to be tough. But I think there's that. So there's the bias against selecting women, but there's also many women that I know of my friends who say, not for me. And incidentally, so I finished 6 years in the provost office this year. That's enough for me for right now. I love the science. I love the mentoring. That I feel like the administration has taken me away from those things that I love. So many people have said to me, why don't you take the next step? Go for another position. What I don't want it. I want to focus on the science. I may change later, but I think that there is both sides there.
Talking about your experience in this administrative role, did you have to give away anything from your own, like Kirsten Edepli characteristic to become a leader in that position? Or did you work with it like, this is me, this is Kirsten, this is my version of doing things? Did you have to adapt to the role, or you made the role adapt to you?
Oh, wow. What a great question. So I would say both. I started out with no experience in sort of university leadership. I had leadership experience in my discipline and, of course, as a lab, as a mentor and running a lab. But I came in with the idea that you said of like, I would adapt. And what was so interesting to me, I became a student of leadership and started to really try to understand what makes a good leader. I wanted to be good at my job. And I realized that I have skills that I've developed as a scientist, critical thinking. I love data. I mean, give me a spreadsheet and then you can close my door and I'm happy for the rest of the day. And I realized that the critical thinking and also being kind of agnostic about data. So if the data says that we have only interviewed men for the past 3 years in a particular discipline, why? Not saying, "Oh, these people are misogynist or they like women," or it's not, it's like, "Oh, why? Where's the gap? Huh, we didn't have any women applicants. Interesting. Why didn't we have women app?" So instead of, coming at it like, I came at it as a scientist. So at first I was trying to, say, okay, now I need to be a leader and like be very understanding, listen, compassionate, whatever. Then I realized, oh, actually I have something to offer here that comes from my
Yeah.
scientific background. So I then made it, I kind of
You brought your scientific personality onto the scene, and of course you want to check the root cause and how we can address that. And yeah,
Yes,
so
and I mean, there's not a talk I don't give it to faculty when I talk about faculty development, faculty advancement, mentoring, etc. Every single one, there's a graph. I say, I like data. I'm a quantitative thinker. Let's take a look at the numbers. So I also bring that in and let people know that about me. I'm a scientist. I think quantitatively. I think in numbers. So it also gives the signal when you talk to me. I'm all about feelings, surely. We wanna know how you're feeling, but tell me what's the problem? Where are the numbers? How can we
how
solve
can
it?
I help? Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. I just want to touch base on cultural and regional differences, because in some regions, nearly half of all researchers are women, while in others it's much lower. How do you think cultural and regional differences impact women's participation in science?
I think we can also look at it from the other way. So in some areas of the world, science is not genderized. So being a mathematician is just a neutral job in a way. Men and women are equally capable and can do it. Just as, for example, in America, in my, what I'm familiar with in my own culture, being a nurse is very gendered. It's like 85% of the nursing population is female. I come to Abu Dhabi, and every time you go to, the hospital, the doctor, there are many, many male nurses around, right? And so that you say, oh, wait, it goes the other way as well. So maybe in some areas of the world, nursing is gendered or not gendered. And so why would it be gendered in my culture? It's not a universal principle. It's not a fundamental rule. So I think that what I've seen, and I'll share an experience that I had. I worked for several years as a professor in Turkey at Boğaziçi University. And there, all of the biology faculty, 100% of the biology faculty were women. I was shocked. I came from Harvard, where it was less than 20%, and then I land in this molecular biology department where it's 100% women, including me. Then I come and join, and so I asked my colleagues, I was so interested, and they had a very interesting perspective. One is they said when something, so with molecular biology, for example, becomes in academia is feminized, it loses status. So it's not as sort of important as mechanical engineering, so there's one area that all of a sudden, once it loses status, then it's wide open for women to go. The second was that they said to go into academia, in order to go into academia, because the pay was so low, you had to have somebody that supported you. And
Mm.
in areas of the world where men are the financial engine of the family, women can go to do another job. So that was also very interesting to me. So all of the women there, they were either single and they were able, or they had very wealthy, they came from wealthy families, or they had husbands that were high earners. So I thought that that was really interesting. But as a result, I mean, most of our students were women, right? Because then women saw that, oh, you can be a professor as a molecular biologist. So there's no barrier there for those girls coming into science. I think, I think it's very interesting in the UAE, where the global population of Emiratis is very small. So if you have a small population, you have to have the full population participating in the workforce, right? It's an incredibly ambitious country, and I really feel that there's incredible empowerment of women here in the UAE to be very successful in their work, to take risks, take on leadership positions. Maybe part of that's pragmatic, maybe part of it is visionary, to say all of our citizens should be empowered. But I also think, of course, there's, it's the motherhood barrier, right? If women have to carry the full load at home, it's very hard to carry the full load at work.
Yeah, it's very interesting actually, because when I did my PhD, we had something like a common say, like supervisor, they like to hire or they like to recruit mothers, because the mother does not have time to lose. So she does experiment. She knows to do list. She does not waste time, which is true. When we compare to others, I was like, this is very interesting. Yeah, but it's a different dynamic. It's different responsibilities. My question actually to you: if you were to design a program or an initiative to encourage more diversity in STEM, what would it be?
Oh my goodness. At the academic level or globally?
Let's start at the academic level.
So, okay, so that one's a little easier because that's something I've been working on for a while. So I don't know if it's really a program, but it's a message. It has to come from the top. So and I'll just share a story with you. I was trained by one of the most revolutionary women in science, Nancy Hopkins, who really changed the world by doing a study at MIT of the very low numbers of women that were on the faculty in science, and then they looked also in engineering. And so when they did this study, and there's so much there and so much to think about from what she learned and how we can apply it to, modern day. The study was 25 years ago, but the principles are exactly the same. And so I'm very close with her. She's been a life, mentor for me throughout my career. And in my previous institution, I was working on just exactly what you said. How do we diversify our faculty, and thinking not just about gender, but about other aspects of identities. And we were working from the bottom up. We were a committee and trying to influence hiring or promotion or job track selection. And she said, I admire you, good for you, but in my 270 visits to universities around the world, I've never seen a substantial change if it doesn't come from the top. And that was a really, I said, no, no, you must, come on, let me, tell me. And she said, no, it, unless you're talking about the top in a small area, like not the top of the university, but in a department, if the department chair makes that decision and they have the authority and the resources to do it, then you can see a change. You don't need to change the whole institution. But that really, honestly, that was like I got like a pit in my stomach saying, oh no, because at my previous institution, we didn't have it from the top. We were trying to do ground up. And guess what? Never worked. Still hasn't worked. So here, I think so I would say if I was to design a program, it would have to include the top. And I don't know how you design a program to convince a senior leader to do that, but it would be getting senior leaders that intuitively sense that without diversity, you are not excellent. That if you are not getting perspectives from people who think differently
Yeah.
from you will not advance, right? So I think I don't know if that's a program, but it would be a perspective, that I would like to have. I would put it at the top. And then another aspect of the programming, and this is just my personal perspective, it's not necessarily true, but a lot of people who are in the majority, so let's talk about like European ancestry men, often feel a little bit afraid of the D word, the diversity word, because they see themselves as part of a problem as opposed to part of the solution. And I think that if there was any type of program, it would have to include whoever is the majority. So here in the UAE, maybe it would be including people who are really decision makers, which are, Emiratis. If it's someplace else, it would include, whoever is that majority group in
Yeah.
part of making that decision. So I don't know if that's a program, but that's really what I would love to see.
I mean, you touch base on several ideas and basically including the majority. And maybe going back to the fact that what are you good at? I think showing data and make the senior people or the top people in the top seeing exactly what numbers are doing, because with numbers you can clearly show the evidence of the objective of this conversation originally. Once they are convinced, I think they will fully hoping that they will fully support any initiatives to come. So maybe we need to have more data on the female scientist situation in this region or others, and try to take it from there.
I mean, it's interesting. I would agree with you 100%. I see data and it speaks to me, but other people, other things speak to them, personal experience, because I think, the numbers are important, but they're not enough. So if you go on a hiring stint and hire all women or people that are underrepresented in their discipline, but there's not a mechanism to support their success, that all of that
Yeah.
input is not gonna get you where you need to be, because if somebody comes in and they're excluded from a collaboration, they're not seen as what will be representative of the excellence in whatever, like, let's say for the CGSB, if we say, we're gonna overlook some people, and maybe it's for programmatic reasons, that's fine, but you also wanna think about what message you're sending,
Yeah. Yeah.
having so I think, yeah, seeing things from, data is important, but then other people really wanna talk about experience. How do you
Yes.
feel? If you
Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
comfortable someplace, you'll bring your best ideas. If you feel marginalized, you'll stay in the background, you'll keep it quiet. So creating
Yeah.
that in culture of is also important.
But this is exactly why we have this podcast, is to highlight the stories, to highlight the challenges, to highlight the hopes and the aspiration. So my question to you actually, it's about what advice would you give a woman who's aspiring to pursue a career in science, and what is your overall hopes for women in science?
Oh, so the first question is quite easy because I give this, I give this advice all the time, whether it's to my undergraduate students or my postdocs. And it's really that they should go for it, go for that opportunity, whether it's doing a hard experiment, whether it's applying for, a long shot, a grant opportunity, whether it's when I say, "Oh, I'd like somebody to represent the lab. I can't be there. Would you like to go?" It's saying yes every time that you take those risks, you put yourself out there. I think women have a tendency, not just in science, to think that the work is going to speak for themselves. I'm sorry, let me tell you. It doesn't. That doesn't mean you don't need to have the excellent work, but there's so much excellent work out there, it doesn't speak for itself. There's a tidal wave of papers coming out every day. How do you pick the one that you're gonna read? It's the one that's highlighted in News and Views,
Yeah.
it's the one that's on the cover of the journal. So, putting yourself out there and really going for those, for things that are hard, I think that's the advice that I give all the time, step up, step up, step up, lean in, whatever, however you wanna call it, lean in, go for it, step up. That's my advice all the time. And then what's my hope? I really hope that there will be a future and hopefully in my daughter's lifetime where she would be, if she chose to be a scientist or a politician or an economist or whatever it is, that she wouldn't be introduced as a woman economist or a woman scientist, but as a scientist, that being a woman is a value in and of itself, but it's not something special that you tack on to a profession, that you are excellent in and of your own right. We're not there yet. I'm often introduced as a woman scientist, and I try to take that. I don't mind being introduced as someone who is an advocate for women in science, but I want my science to be what leads, right? I didn't choose to be a woman. I didn't, I was born with my XX chromosomes, and here I am as a woman, but I did choose to be a scientist, and I try every day to be an excellent scientist. I want that to speak for it. So I hope that in the future that a woman will get an award because she's a scientist. I hope that a woman will be promoted because she's a scientist. And I hope that people will value the perspective of women and men equally. That's my hope.
Kirsten, thank you for joining us today and for sharing your insights, your journey, your contribution and perspective. We really appreciate all of that. We enjoy talking to you and sharing all of these experiences.
Thank you so much for having me. I always love to talk about this topic, and it was just wonderful to spend, 45 minutes of my day talking about it.
To our listeners, thank you for joining us today. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we will continue exploring these important topics with another remarkable guest. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and join us in the Untold Science Women in STEM. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible.